I saw this video. Someone shared this video today, and I think it's really important to go over it just because this might give a bit more context as to like our perspective of the economy. But yeah, this was really interesting to watch.
There's a chart I saw recently that I can't get out of my head. A Harvard business professor and economist asked more than 5,000 Americans how they thought wealth was distributed in the United States. This is what they said they thought it was. Dividing the country into 5 rough groups of the top, bottom, and middle 3 20% groups, they asked people how they thought the wealth in this country was divided. Then he asked them what they thought was the ideal distribution. And 92%, that's at least 9 out of 10 of them, said it should be more like this. In other words, more equitable than they think it is. Now that fact is telling, admittedly, the notion that most Americans know that the system is already skewed unfairly. But what's most interesting to me is the reality compared to our perception. The ideal is as far removed from our perception of reality as the actual distribution is from what we think exists in this country. So ignore the ideal for a moment. Here's what we think it is again. And here is the actual distribution. Shockingly skewed. Not only do the bottom 20% and the next 20%, the bottom 40% of Americans barely have any of the wealth. I mean, it's hard to even see them on the chart. But the top 1% has more of the country's wealth than 9 out of 10 Americans believe the entire top 20% should have. Mind-blowing. But let's...
It's way fucking worse than people think it is.
Look at it another way, because I find this chart kind of difficult to wrap my head around. Instead, let's reduce the 311 million Americans to just a representative 100 people. Make it simple. Here they are. Teachers, coaches, firefighters, construction workers, engineers, doctors, lawyers, some investment bankers, a CEO, maybe a celebrity or two. Now let's line them up according to their wealth. Poorest people on the left, wealthiest on the right, just a steady row of folks based on their net worth. We'll color code them like we did before based on which 20% quintile they fall into. Now let's reduce the total wealth of the United States, which was roughly $54 trillion in 2009, to this symbolic pile of cash. And let's distribute it among our 100 Americans. Well, here's socialism, all the wealth of the country distributed equally. We all know that won't work.
It won't work.
It did work, though. It did work. It did fucking work.
People. It didn't work for rich people because rich people want you to own nothing, be happy, and eat see bugs.
If it didn't work, then the CIA would not invest the amount of resources it does trying to dismantle the dreaded socialism wherever it springs up.
In southern Latin American countries, right? We have Venezuela is literally, it was working. It was working, and then we put sanctions on it, and it went. Yes, the rich in this country will not let socialism or communism in because they know they don't want poor people to have as much money as they will have.
Not just that, but I will just say, for all the people who are like it doesn't work. Well, let's look at the chart here. A largely agrarian country that wasn't even fully industrialized went from being a largely not even fully industrialized country to a fucking economic superpower that destroyed fascism and ended World War II in several decades. So doesn't work? I don't know. Seems to. But you won't read about that in the history books.
No, we need to encourage people to work.
You know, it has to be the boogeyman. Look at Cuba. You know, there was, people were stuck in the 50s because they had, that embargo on Cuba, and Cuba was socialist. So, I mean, it's, the rich do not want poor people to have money. That is very obvious because we here are all part of that bottom 20% where literally, I'm supposed to take my son to a new dentist and I hope there's not a copay because I can't fucking afford it.
Mm-hmm.
and I'm on medical assistance because I can't afford medical care for anything.
Also, I will say, this is a bit of an oversimplification, because in socialist countries, it's not like everybody is paid the same. You make different wages. I'll point out what's like more accurate when it comes to actual socialist countries, but we'll continue.
Right.
Work and work hard to achieve that good old American dream and keep our country moving forward. So, here's that ideal we asked everyone about. Something like this curve. This isn't too bad. We've got some incentive, as the wealthiest folks are now about 10 to 20 times better off than the poorest Americans. But hey, even the poor folks aren't actually poor, since the poverty line has stayed almost entirely off the chart. We have a super healthy middle class with a smooth transition into wealth. And yes, Republicans and Democrats alike chose this curve.
Which is hilarious, because this is what an actual socialist country would kind of resemble a lot more.
Yeah, you work hard, you get something at the end of the day. You get the White House with the white picket fence,
Yeah, because it all stems around the means of production and the lack of exploiting the surplus value of your labor. So even, if you're a janitor, because there's a common argument with conservatives and anti-communists where it's like, well, socialism doesn't work because, like, why would anybody be a doctor if they make the same as a janitor? And it's like, well, no, the janitor doesn't make the same as the doctor. All it means is that regardless of what you do as a worker, as someone with a profession, you can at least afford to live comfortably. That is the whole point of it. It's, I don't know where they got this idea that everybody made the same amount of money, regardless of what profession they had. It was never in the cards. It wasn't even talked about by anyone discussing theory, because that's not how it worked. It was looked at more scientific.
I think this was just oogie boogie boogie, oh no, scary socialism, scary communism. You're all going to be the same and blah, blah, blah.
It's
but if you look up communism,
boogie, boogie.
yeah, boogie, boogie, boogie. If you look up communism, it just means public owned.
It means collective ownership over the means of production. So to kind of simplify it, it's the abolishment of private property. But that's another stream I'm going to do, where I kind of break down a lot of the common misconceptions, because there's like a million, and that's all by design. Because, like, listen, you can't get to this corporate-owned Democrat is a Marxist without heavy amounts of disinformation.
Right.
But yeah, so this is like, this is what Americans want. So they want something far closer to socialism than what they actually have, but they just don't know that.
9 out of 10 people, 92%, said this was a nice, ideal distribution of America's wealth.
And that's
but let's
because
move on.
They want to scare you and make you think that socialism is bad, Oh, boogie, 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 but capitalism is,
you ask them what it means, and they don't know.
Yeah, they don't know. They just think it's, you're a commie, because socialism and communism is the same thing. I'm like, no, it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing.
What's a commie? It's like, I don't know either. So you don't know what you
communism. Capitalism is, it's the angels, it's heaven. Yeah. No, it's not. No, it's not.
They've demonized any other system so hard that
and that's because they want capitalism. Yep.
Yeah, they do the whole, like, it's human nature, which ridiculous, and then they go, this is the best we can do, also ridiculous. But this will point that out.
As wealth distribution actually looks like. Not as equitable, clearly, but for me, even this still looks pretty great. Yes, the poorest 20 to 30% are starting to suffer quite a lot compared to the ideal, and the middle class is certainly struggling more than they were, while the rich and wealthy are making roughly 100 times that of the poorest Americans and about 10 times that of the still healthy middle class. Sadly, this isn't even close to the reality. Here is the actual distribution of wealth in America. The poorest Americans don't even register. They're down to pocket change. And the middle class is barely distinguishable from the poor.
Yeah.
In fact, even the rich between the top 10 and 20 percentile are worse off. Only the top 10% are better off. And how much better off? So much better off that the top 2 to 5% are actually off the chart at this scale. And the top 1%, this guy, well, his stack of money stretches 10 times higher than we can show. Here's his stack of cash, restacked, all by itself. This is the top 1% we've been hearing so much about. So much green in his pockets that I have to give him a whole new column of his own because he won't fit on my chart. 1% of America has 40% of all the nation's wealth. The bottom 80%, 8 out of every 10 people, or 80 out of these 100, only has 7% between them. And this has only gotten worse in the last 20 to 30 years. While the richest 1% take home almost a quarter of the national income today, in 1976, they took home only 9%, meaning their share of income has nearly tripled in the last 30 years. The top 1% own half the country's stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. The bottom 50% of Americans own only 0.5% of these investments.
Because no one can afford it.
They aren't investing. They're just scraping by. I'm sure many of these wealthy people have worked very hard for their money. But do you really believe that the CEO is working 380 times harder than his average employee? Not his lowest paid employee, not the janitor, but the average earner in his company. The average worker needs to work more than a month to earn what the CEO makes in 1 hour. We certainly don't have to go all the way to socialism to find something that is fair for hardworking Americans. We don't even have to achieve what most of us consider might be ideal. All we need to do is wake up and realize that the reality in this country is not at all what we think it is.
Right. And Snow, if I could just say something real quick, it's like Jesse Ventura before he went all wokey shitlib thing. He was saying how, it is actually worse. I mean, he said, why should someone who is a pencil pusher, as they call him, why should he, when he sits around at a desk all day, get more than someone who is runs a jackhammer? Why? I mean, the guy on the jackhammer is actually doing hard labor work. So why is a guy who sits at a desk all day and sucks his own dick getting more money than someone who's actually working and doing hard work labor? I completely agree with him.
Well, the thing is, my take on it is this. The problem is, like those two examples to begin with, I'm technically a pencil pusher and we're barely scraping by, 2-income family. Right. I feel like the problem is like, why do we live in a society where you can have a 2-income home and still be struggling to pay the bills? Why do we live in a society where there's so little to go around that people are arguing over, like, well, this person should be paid more, this person should be paid more. Mm-hmm. It's a psychology, it's a mindset of scarcity. And that's because we live under late stage capitalism. And look at that. And that's the wake up call that a lot of these Trump supporters are going to get, because that's how bad it is. Mm-hmm. And everything Donald Trump's going to do is going to make that worse.
Absolutely. Guaranteed. I completely agree.
Guaranteed, especially with the tariffs, because what the tariffs are going to do is they're going to make everything more expensive. Yep. So that giant chunk at the far end of that chart, that's not going to hit them at all. It's probably going to benefit them. They're all business owners. They're all blah, blah, blah. It's just going to create upward transfers of wealth. Mm-hmm. Like, it's going to absolutely crush the so-called middle class. I just call it the proletariat, really. It's gonna absolutely destroy the working class, and they already have nothing to go off. So this whole promise of like, we're going to get rid of the income tax and replace it with tariffs and all this shit. First off, I don't know if this is ever going to materialize. I know there's a lot of fear mongering, but like, it's Trump, right? So like what he talks about, he's for all of the shit he gets for being like a different politician, he's very much the same. He makes a bunch of promises. He gets into office. He forgets about half of them.
No, he doesn't forget. Let's be honest here. He doesn't forget. He lies about it.
Yeah, he lies.
Well, yeah.
He would say anything to get what I told the Trumper. I said, he'll say anything. He's been on every side. I mean, every politician nowadays has been on every side of every issue, to be honest. And that's, they'll say anything to get votes. I absolutely agree with you, Snow, that, I mean, Trump will do exactly what he is told by the establishment, or he'll be JFK'd. I mean, he really will. They won't miss this time. They won't miss.
Well, I see a lot of cope where they're just like, yeah, it was a warning shot. It was a warning shot to get him in line. And I'm like, then why are you supporting him? Yeah. If the establishment did a warning shot to scare him into submission, then why are you like, he's going to save us? It's just cope. And that's my point. These people you're going to get millions of disillusioned Trump supporters once they realize that the second time around is not going to be the same as the first. I remember when everybody went through this with fucking Obama, or up here in Canada with Trudeau the second time around, where everybody's like, it's going to be different this time.
Second Obama didn't, same as the first.
Yep. And I feel like that's where we're pretty much headed.
Absolutely. I mean, there's already talk of, bugs in the food supply. And of course, I mean, if you look at you don't even have to go to, the extreme. But if you look at Bill Gates owns more farmland in the United States, that is a fact. Okay. I don't care how people feel about that fact. It is a fact that Bill Gates owns more farmland in the United States than most farmers. Why? He knows dick all about farming. He's a guy who didn't finish college, but got a good deal and monopolized on the computer business, or the, Windows, of course. So how exactly, and the big question is, well, why would he do this? Because he wants to control the food supply, guys. You don't have to look for conspiracy theories, or you don't have to worship at the altar of Bill Gates to know that he came from a wealthy family. People want to say, oh, he was in his garage and he worked himself, up to where he got to. No, he didn't, guys. He came from a wealthy family. He was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He did not, and his family believed in eugenics, where rich people have the superior genes and poor people have inferior genes. That's just a fact, guy. That's a reality. I don't care how you feel about that. Yeah. Oh, yeah. His dad was rich. His dad was in they think he was part of the SS, that he also was funding Hitler and stuff like that. James Corbett has a good Who is Bill Gates? If you want to look that up. James Corbett in the Corbett Report, he talks about that. He does like a whole documentary on like Bill Gates. It's like a 4-part system that he kind of put together. And yeah, I know. Like people just like literally forgot. Like they did a couple of documentaries on Bill Gates. And they made those documentaries sound like, oh, he came from a poor family and he built himself up into Microsoft. No, he came from a rich family, y'all. He came from a rich family who hated poor people. And that's the problem. Yeah. Elon Musk, same thing. Most of the rich people nowadays are all heirs. They all accumulated their wealth from being passed down from, parents to children.
Well, that's a lie of the self-made man. I'm sure there are self-made people out there, but when you look at these super wealthy people, the majority of them is like, okay, parents gave them a loan, or like they came into all this money, and even Jeff Bezos, I forget the exact amount, but I think it was like a loan of like 30 grand or something. But it's like, that's a loan that the average person isn't going to be able to get. The average person isn't going to be able to get $30,000.
Yep, trust me.
When we talk about these people being self-made, and it's like you just got to work hard enough. It's like, okay, well, yeah, work hard enough and literally have like the luck of just being born into access to capital that the average person does not have. If your parents are not rich, like, it is a literal fluke that you get rich. It's a fluke. You luck out. The majority of people, they start a small business.
Yep.
And it just doesn't work out for them because they don't have access to that capital.
Right.
And that's how we're at the position that we are. And intergenerational wealth is a big factor in that as well. That's why you see people who are poor,
right,
their kids go on to being poor as well, because they're stuck in the same cycle of selling your labor to survive.
Right.
And that's a nearly impossible cycle to get out of, which, by the way, is obviously completely by design. A big chunk of your money goes to paying rent, so it's paying someone else off to live in their house, essentially. And then on top of that, you have bills to pay for, you have food to pay for, which is ridiculously expensive nowadays.
Yep.
And that's a cycle you're stuck in. And the thing is, you spend so much of your life, usually 8 hours a day. And nowadays, I know people who are working 2 jobs. So they're working a job and then they're working another job on top of that. You're spending all of your all of your waking time is spent working for other people. So, like, where is this magical time that you're going to spend getting out of this cycle?
And if you have kids, it's worse. That's why I sort of, I love my shows to death, but I mean, the thing is, like, I have 4 jobs. Literally, I have a full-time job, plus I have other, like, full-time jobs because, I need to do research for my shows, and I'm away from my son. There's some times where I don't see my son pretty much all day because literally I have, double duty I have to do. And it's like I still can barely make ends meet. And I agree. I mean, I shouldn't, as a technician working on computers, I think, no offense, I should make more than I do. But we're a small business and they can't really, give me as much as I need, I'm not saying that, but I agree with the fact of, well, if you can't be a small business and give me a living wage, then you shouldn't be in business. I guess that's what I'm getting at. But I mean, I love all the people I work with. This is why I do my shows, because I love all the people I work with. I do a show with Angel. I do a show, about my favorite wrestler, and I do Black Magic, talk about my religion and stuff. But, that's not creating revenue the way I want it to, because I'm not a big CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. I'm not as big as them, and they're really, YouTube and Rumble aren't made for small shows. I'm not that well known. I mean, I just reached 100K on my wrestling podcast, and that's great. But again, not getting any revenue because I don't have enough watch time, and they don't like small shows like me. So they want to keep us down because the rich don't want us to become rich. Let's face it. The rich don't want us up where they are in the club. They don't want us in the club, or otherwise we'd already be there.
Well, because the rich can only maintain the level of wealth that they do with everybody else working for them. And that's kind of where we're at.
Yep.
They also enjoy the power dynamic that is present in all of our jobs. Mm-hmm. We are stuck in this cycle where we essentially can never really kind of have any leverage at our jobs to begin with, because there's always that fear of getting fired, and that fear of getting fired comes with, like, well, if I lose my job, I can't pay my rent. And then it becomes a spiral of, like, being homeless on the street. And that's what the majority of the working class live with every day of their lives. It's that perpetual dread of, and even on top of that, because our companies are so obsessed with profit, there's always the fear of, like, getting laid off, for example, where it's like, hey, we need to cut some costs. We're just going to, let go. That's what happened to me. They laid off our entire department at one of my old jobs so they could go outsource the labor for like $2 an hour overseas, which, I'm not mad at them for it. It's like, you know what? It's geopolitical, it's geo-economic exploitation. But, it's like, they just basically took the ability to put food on the table for a whole department of people because because they wanted to maximize the profits.
Mm-hmm.